This video is brought to you by Athletic Greens. What's up guys, Michael here, and today we're talking about everyone's favorite sex fluid, shape-shifting Norse god. That's right, Loki. The Trickster God solo series opened up a whole new level of the MCU's cosmology, introducing us to the multiverse and the management agency that oversees it, the Time Variance Authority. This bureaucracy, which exists outside of time and space, gives zero Fs about Loki or his glorious purpose and proceeds to make his life miserable. And while it's plenty entertaining to watch Loki get caught in a tangled web of bureaucracy, we think there's actually a lot more going on here. In particular, the show explores the way in which bureaucratic institutions can constrain and even annihilate our ability to be free. And if the show is right, then what does this say about the real-life bureaucracies that play such a huge role in our own lives? To help us understand, we need to revisit the work of a very dead author who had more than a few things to say about bureaucracy, Franz Kafka. We'll explain in this Wisecrack Edition on Loki, the illusion of freedom. Major spoilers ahead for the Disney Plus series and some 100-year-old Czech literature. But before we get into it, I wanted to give a special shout out to this week's sponsor, Athletic Greens. Now, it might shock you to learn that I'm not a professional athlete, and the last time I did competitive sports was in high school. But as I get older, it's become important to me that I take care of myself and make the sort of decisions that will help me stay healthy. And this is why I was excited to learn about Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens is an all-in-one greens powder that's designed to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet and support your body's nutritional needs along 4 pillars of support: gut health, immune support, energy, and recovery. It uses 75 ingredients to give you one of the most complete nutrition formulas on the market, including vitamins and minerals, prebiotics and probiotics, adaptogens and antioxidants, superfood complex, and digestive enzymes and mushroom complex. And that's all very impressive, but one of the things I like the most about Athletic Greens is that it actually tastes good. And it's super easy to prepare. You just fill your shaker or bottle of choice with cold water, add a scoop of Athletic Greens, shake the heck out of it, and drink. I've added it to my morning routine, and it takes less than a minute to have my Athletic Greens ready to go. In the past, I've tried to stay healthy by taking like 5 different types of vitamins a day, but I always end up forgetting. Athletic Greens makes it easy to make sure I'm getting all the nutrients my body needs. And while I'm unlikely to transition into a career as a professional athlete anytime soon, it's great to know that Athletic Greens is NSF certified for sport, meaning it's approved for Olympic athletes. To get the Athletic Greens Immunity Bundle that comes with a 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 individual travel packs for free with your first purchase, go to athleticgreens.com/wisecrack or click the link in the description. Being healthy is hard, so make it easier with Athletic Greens. And now, back to the show. Now, before we can unpack what's happening to this Norse god, we first need to talk about this Czech author. One of the most influential modern writers, Franz Kafka worked a day job as a clerk in an insurance agency, so he was no stranger to unmitigated bureaucracy. Unsurprisingly then, his writing frequently features protagonists caught in a labyrinth of bureaucratic systems, often to the point that any attempts to escape or even understand these systems is rendered comically futile. This unique brand of absurd humor in the face of soul-crushing oppression has been appropriately dubbed Kafkaesque. You've probably heard the term used earnestly by tweed-clad critics or ironically by overeducated comedy writers.
Yeah, it's very Kafkaesque.
Because it's written by Franz Kafka.
Now, Kafka's novels and short stories have been pored over by critics and philosophers for decades, leading to wildly different and often contradictory interpretations. As a result, the word Kafkaesque gets overused to describe anything that's even vaguely bureaucratic or just mildly inconvenient.
I gotta pay taxes now? What the hell's up with that? That's messed up, this Kafkaesque. Church.
So what actually makes something Kafkaesque? And what does that have to do with Loki waxing philosophical about jet skis with a seemingly all-knowing Owen Wilson?
Yeah. My jet ski magazine, put it down, come on.
Well, when the series starts, Loki is fresh off his campaign to take over the Earth, Asgard, and the whole universe. So when he's detained by unnamed agents from a mysterious authority for an unknown crime, he's understandably miffed. He's then subjected to a series of bizarre intake procedures and eventually put on trial for a crime that he still doesn't fully comprehend. This evokes Kafka's famous novel, The Trial, in which a man named Joseph K. is also arrested by unnamed agents of an unspecified authority for an unknown crime. Over the course of the novel, K is subjected to an utterly corrupt and unknowable justice system which operates with little logic and under no central authority. Eventually, he's executed without ever knowing what crime he supposedly committed. Unlike K, Loki pretty quickly learns why he's been arrested and who is doing the arresting. But he is rightly suspicious of the true purpose of the TVA and the nature of the so-called timekeepers. He eventually figures out that they are merely synthetic androids and that the entire TVA was created by some other, even more unknowable figure who exists even more outside of time and space. He also learns that all of the agents of the TVA were pulled from other timelines, they just don't know it. In this way, the TVA shares a lot in common with the legal system in the trial. In the novel, when K approaches a priest about the falsity of his accusations, he's told, "It is not necessary to accept everything as true. One must accept it as necessary." Writing 20 years later, philosopher Hannah Arendt points to this moment as the novel's summation of the tyranny of bureaucracies, saying, "Lying for the sake of necessity appears as something sublime, and a man who does not submit to the machinery, though submission may mean his death, is regarded as a sinner against some kind of divine order." That is to say, in this world, submitting to bureaucracy is more important than, protecting your own life. And even after the timekeepers are revealed to be Disney animatronics, some agents still swear loyalty to the TVA, not out of an acceptance of truth, but out of an acceptance of its necessity.
I think people are ready to hear a little truth now. Like the TVA is a lie.
But what if it's a necessary one?
Arendt describes the tendency of bureaucracies to sustain themselves, even without a real leader. In her book, On Violence, she writes, "Bureaucracy is the form of government in which everybody is deprived of political freedom, of the power to act. For the rule by nobody is not no rule, and where all are equally powerless, we have a tyranny without a tyrant." Which is to say, you don't need a dictator in a funny hat to have a super oppressive government. But Loki's conflict with authority and search for freedom goes way beyond the bureaucratic halls of the TVA. See, the bulk of the show is dedicated to answering the question, what makes a Loki a Loki? Rather than being an introspective character study, the question is treated more like a detailed deconstruction of his identity and autonomy. When he's first assessed by Mobius, he's shown clips from his life up to that point, along with what would have happened in his original timeline.
You weren't born to be king, Loki. You were born to cause pain and suffering and death, all so that others can achieve their best versions of themselves.
Confronted with the reality that all of his choices went to shit, Loki admits that the free will he thought he had was little more than a trick he pulled on himself.
It's part of the illusion. It's the cruel, elaborate trick conjured by the weak to inspire fear.
The desperate play for control. You do know yourself.
It wasn't his own individual agency that led him to do the things he did. It was his compulsion to fulfill a societal role. In this case, the role of God of Mischief. Similarly, Kafka wasn't only concerned with the loss of free will under authoritarian bureaucracies. He also saw individual autonomy itself as comically irrelevant in a society where everyone is more or less assigned a particular role to perform. While it's easy to read Kafka's work as a dark meditation on the loss of freedom under bureaucratic governments, some philosophers argue that it serves as a humorous satire of the entire concept of free will. Philosopher Dimitris Vardoulakis writes that Kafka's humor is a response to the Western conception of freedom, which he tirelessly presents in his narratives, and that this response implies an alternative conception of freedom. In this vein, Loki complicates what we think freedom is, namely, the ability to simply do what we want. In reality, even our chosen actions can be done within the context of performing a preordained role. And in what's arguably his most famous work, The Metamorphosis, he explores this idea through a traveling salesman named Gregor Samsa, who wakes up one morning to find he's been transformed into an insect. Sadly, there is no alligator Gregor. Rather than worrying about the existential implications of this transformation, Gregor's first thought is about how he will be able to keep his job to provide for his family. As time goes on and Gregor's condition doesn't improve, his family increasingly neglects him, reacting with utter disgust every time they see him. He eventually passes away and the family rejoices. Harsh. The Metamorphosis derives its ironic humor from treating the fantastical and bewildering as mundane and tiresome. Loki does much of the same.
Infinity stones?
We actually got a lot of those. Yeah, some of the guys use them as paperweights.
Or, this.
If it were me, this is where I would hide.
But on a deeper level, Kafka's story is a disturbing deconstruction of individualism. Once he is stripped from his role as family provider, Gregor is also effectively stripped of his self-worth. The fact that he's more concerned about his financial and social status than, being a f***ing bug is an ironic commentary on the burdens placed on us by society. We see a similar metamorphosis happen with Loki. Once he finds himself stripped of his role as the god of mischief, he has a full-blown identity crisis. When he eventually submits and starts working for the TVA, he is tasked with literally finding himself. Well, a variant of himself, but still. Meeting Sylvie, he's confronted with a version of himself who is singularly obsessed with her own glorious purpose, namely, bringing down the TVA. He decides to help her achieve this goal, mostly because he's fallen in love with himself, which is, a pretty Loki thing to do. But once they finally meet the man behind the curtain, or he who remains, it's revealed that even their acts of defiance and rebellion were all a part of their set path, and that they've been playing right into his hands the entire time.
No, we broke out of your little game. That's how we got here.
No, wrong. Every step you took to get here, Lamentus the Void, I paved the road. You just walked down it.
In this way, the show presents us with a world where, in the face of all-powerful agencies upheld by unwitting agents, free will is nothing more than an illusion. And you don't have to be controlled by a shadowy management agency operating outside of time and space to fall victim to this plight, because real freedom is often subsumed under structures of power like governments. As Vardulakis puts it, we think that we have the freedom to exercise our will only by forgetting that power is exercised not simply by delimiting our freedom, but by confining our will to power's own operation and perpetuation. The more we exercise our free will, the more power proliferates. In other words, when we feel like we're freely participating in or working for some large organization or power, like a big corporation, what we're actually doing is sacrificing and ultimately losing that very freedom. Freedom, paradoxically, ends up being the prerequisite to being controlled. Or, as Judge Renslayer puts it,
free will? Only one person gets free will. The one in charge.
And while not an interdimensional time cop, Kafka agrees. He even argues that our own individual ambitions can be as oppressive as the forces of bureaucracy. His short story, A Hunger Artist, is about a performer who makes a living starving himself for the entertainment of others, like a turn-of-the-century David Blaine. The performer, though, singularly obsessed with his craft, laments the fact that he's only legally allowed to fast for 40 days, lest he, starve to death. When this restriction is lifted, mainly due to a lack of public interest in his act, he's finally allowed to achieve his goal of starving himself to death. Here, the irony is that this guy's greatest dream is literally the cause of his own very hungry demise. Loki has a similar confrontation with his own individual ambition. Over the course of the series, his catchphrase,
I am burdened with glorious purpose,
begins to change in meaning, with the emphasis less on the glorious purpose and more on the burden. When he finally escapes the TVA and reaches the end of time, he's confronted with the possibility of finally getting what he always desired.
You want the Infinity Gauntlet? Yours. Throne of Asgard? No problem.
But unlike the Hunger Artist doubling down on the whole starvation thing, Loki decides to relinquish his ambitions. By now, he doesn't seem to care much about taking down the TVA and exposing the truth either. He simply wants to spend his life, even if it is an artificial one, with Sylvie. In a way, he is freed from his shackles not by overthrowing his oppressors, but from laying down the burden of his ambition.
I don't want a throne. I just want you to be okay.
Sylvie, on the other hand, comes to the opposite conclusion. Having been burdened her whole life with the task of destroying the TVA and killing whoever created it, she finds it impossible to abandon that quest. But in a truly Kafkaesque turn, once she finally achieves her goal, she's left alone and defeated. But rather than starving herself to death, she simply ruined the whole of reality. Hey, it happens to the best of us. And despite her actions, the TVA persist, and on multiple timelines, under the leadership of an even more oppressive authority. Kafkaesque indeed. And, oh yeah, Loki's even more screwed than he was at the beginning. But if the show, and Kafka, are right about the way in which bureaucratic institutions slowly chip away at our freedom and individuality, what does this mean for us? You don't have to be arrested for an unknown crime to think, nothing good. Sure, Kafka had his gripes about 20th century bureaucracy, but dude would lose his shit if he could see the modern world. As anthropologist David Graeber argues in his book, The Utopia of Rules, bureaucracy has become the water in which we swim, and our contemporary times are an age of total bureaucratization, in that it's so ubiquitous we almost don't even recognize it anymore. We may think we're swimming freely, but we're simply going with the current. From excessive standardized testing in grade school, to megalithic prison systems, to the 14 pages of paperwork you fill out every time you go to the eye doctor, bureaucracy is everywhere. Increasingly, every job requires higher education, certificate programs, and written tests to be hired, and increasingly, those hired office workers find more and more of their time sucked up by administrative bureaucratic tasks in what Graeber not so fondly calls bullshit jobs. And he argues that this bureaucracy ultimately serves to make us less free by encouraging conformity and rule following, and situating us in a society run by rules that are enforced by violence. We're not the TVA synthetic android drones living outside of time and space, but if Kafka and Graeber are right, bureaucracy and the institutions that govern our lives are still entirely capable of slowly chipping away at our freedom. So what do we do, and is there any way to fight back? Let's turn to our two favorite Lokis, or is it Loki? The original god of mischief decides to accept the systems that govern him, take over the keys to the timeline from He Who Remains, who is absolutely King the Conqueror, and try to change bureaucracy from the inside.
You take over and return to the TVA as its benevolent rulers.
And in the meantime, he'll try to live his best life. Sylvie, on the other hand, would argue that these systems are beyond reform and need to be burned the F down so we can start over and stop filling out so much goddamn paperwork. But what do you guys think? Are any of us truly free, or are we merely at the whims of the social structures and bureaucratic systems that surround us? Let us know what you think in the comments. Either way, smash that like and subscribe button, but do it because you want to, not because I told you to. Big thanks to our patrons for all your support, and as always, thanks for watching. Later.